Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to Mormon Sex Info. This is Natasha Helfer-Parker, and tonight I am very excited to talk to the author of a new book that came out just recently in regards to sexuality, kind of directed towards LDS couples who are about to get married or newly married or things of that nature. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But before I do, just a few announcements. Anybody who's interested, first of all, in a faith transition retreat, I am partnering with Dan Witherspoon coming up in almost a little less than 2 weeks, the March 1st through 3rd weekend in the Salt Lake City area. And you can find more information about that on my website, natashaparker.org. These are great retreats for people who are wanting to nuance their faith within Mormonism, maybe people who are even considering leaving Mormonism, definitely people who are in mixed faith relationships. We've had people in the past that come in mixed faith marriages. We've even had attendees come like parents and their adult children come because they're on different kind of aspects of the faith transition. It's very, very helpful relationally. And one of the days I speak specifically on sexuality as well. So it's been very well reviewed. And if anybody's interested in that, again, go to natashaparker.org. It's March 1st through 3rd coming up here in a few weeks. Just so you know, kind of date-wise, when this podcast is being released, tonight is February 18th, 2019. And let's see. Oh, and I wanted to also just let people know that I'm kind of in the process of shifting maybe how I do Mormon Sex Info podcasts. In the past, I wanted to have it content that was paid for content, and I'm thinking about reworking that just because it's so much easier to go through iTunes for all of you who have had problems downloading the content, even when you pay for it, etc. But I can't do this work just out of the goodness of my heart. I have to pay for a website. I have to pay for an editor. I have to pay for my own time. And there's quite a few costs involved in this. So, I'm just asking anybody who finds these Mormon Sex Info podcasts valuable to be willing to become a subscriber for $35 a year, which is very affordable. You can, at this point, purchase, podcasts kind of on a one-on-one basis, but that may be changing here in the near future. So keep posted, but if you're wanting to support my work and these podcasts that I love doing, especially on sexuality, I would really appreciate your support and your kind of financial support as well. If you can't support me financially, but still want to support me, a great way to do that is to like my Facebook page or share a podcast that I've done on your page and let other people know about it. Maybe even give a review on the Facebook page of Mormon Sex Info. All of those things are very helpful on my end to be able to spread the word. All right, without any further ado, let's talk about this book. It's called, and it was very good, A Latter-day Saints Guide to Lovemaking. And it is written anonymously by quote unquote earthly parents. And it is directed towards kind of, I think, this idea that as parents, what would we want maybe our adult children to know about sexuality, especially maybe going into a marriage. So it's a book written from an LDS values perspective, and I have the main author on the podcast today. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi. I wish I could, but I'm in a marriage, and my wife is more private than I am about these things. So I will be EP. So forgive me for being a little bit less open than I would otherwise want to be. But
no, that's perfectly fine. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe what some considerations are that you've made in your marriage as to whether or not to be public about your name or to keep it kind of anonymous?
It's really only about this one topic, right? Where I think that if you read the book, and the book is free if you want it. So we'll talk about that at the end. It's a very, very low price of free if you want to have a PDF copy of this. But the material in there is, I wouldn't say completely vanilla, but it's detailed, but it's not out there. And if that's your sexual experience, and you're my wife, and you say, well, it's a spotlight into our life, into our sexuality, like that can be a little too exposing. So
Sure.
that's probably, I don't want to speak for her. I'm not speaking for her, but I think that's part of it.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. It makes sense because you're offering a lot of your own personal perspectives, I guess, in the book. Although you're fairly clinical about it as well. I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily read the book and said, "Oh, this is straight out of their playbook."
No.
But I think you're trying to give kind of a fairly comprehensive view on how sex can look like in a marriage. Is that, I mean, why don't you talk a little bit about what was the goal in writing the book?
Yeah. So I have 7 kids, and I had thought for some time, I was the one that read the sex manuals when I was a kid. I had the World Encyclopedia on one shelf, and far before puberty, I noticed I think it was Everything You Want to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask was on the very top shelf. I climbed to the top shelf and got that down, and I was like, this wasn't in the S to SM section of the World Book Encyclopedia that was on the bottom that I read a lot. And I kind of wondered at the time, why they keep misspelling organism? Is this orgasm thing? I don't quite get that much. I mean, that's the age at which I kind of learned a lot of this stuff. But I felt that for me, it was very helpful. Puberty was no surprise. I knew what was going on. When I did get married, I'm not, I mean, not to be too revealing, but it was, there was nothing that was a real shock to me. And that was not necessarily the case. The people that I at least had kind of talked to when I was at BYU and Deseret Towers, you'd hear things that were like, wait a second, you think that? I'm pretty sure that your wife will never have an orgasm if that's what you really decide to do in life. So I even though I didn't have any experience, I felt as though I'd benefited from the experience of others. And I really wanted that for my own kids. But every sex manual that I looked at was, I guess the word is porny. And
That's
and
an interesting word.
well, yeah, I mean, it just, and I didn't want that. And I didn't like some of the framing that was in some of it. And so you kind of go to the Christian sex manuals, and they were inadequate. I don't know what else to say. They just didn't provide the detail and talked in generalities, I thought, a lot of times when something more would be needed. So I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to buckle down and do this. And I sat down and I wrote one sentence, and I then let it sit there for 7 years and did nothing else on it. But then I saw last summer, and I don't know if you saw it, but if you saw the Mr. Rogers movie.
I have not seen that. I've heard it was wonderful, and I need to see it. I need to put that on my list for sure.
So this is not a spoiler, but at the beginning, there's a black and white home video or home movie or whatever that Fred Rogers has made. And he's sitting at the piano, and he starts playing chords, and he says, there's sometimes some transitions that are really, really easy. You go from C chord to F chord to G chord. You just do it, and it just happens. But there's some transitions from, say, C major to F sharp major that you just don't do all at once. You have to do all these kind of steps. You have to get there. It's hard. It's a hard transition. And he said, I don't want to push the metaphor too far. And he kind of laughs at one point. He said, but that seemed like his purpose in life, maybe, was to help people through those hard transitions. And when I saw that, I don't know if anybody else had this feeling, but I thought, I need to write that Mormon sex manual. Kind of an odd thing, I don't think Fred Rogers intended that, but that's what I thought when I was there. So I went home and I started really seriously thinking about it. And by this time, my kids are, in their 20s. Some of them could get married, who knows when, right? Close. So it's kind of now or never. So I started writing it and started listening to you and other podcasts, and then reading dissertations of people that talk to Mormons and in their, as they kind of got into like the honeymoon and their lives and others. And then I did a survey of people on the Eternal Marriage Bed board, asking them what happened on their honeymoons. And I think the word is horrified. I was horrified with what I heard. I thought, wow, these people had really bad experiences. And then it became not just something I was doing for my kids, but maybe something a little bit more needed to be there. And so I really thought, okay, I got to figure out what I really, really, really think about this stuff, put it in a framework that I think that would be right for my kids, and then get all the best information I can possibly get out there. I'm not afraid to go out and read a lot of scientific papers, or that's my job in real life. So that's what I did. I just tried to get everything I could, make it as realistic as possible, and then as a last step, send it to a few people. You were one, Ramel McElprank is another, and Jennifer Finlayson Fife, and you and Ramel in particular just provided a great deal of incredibly helpful feedback on things that I couldn't get from a book, I couldn't get from my own life, and where you see the problems and see how, say, one phrase might be taken the wrong way and really cause problems. I don't know why you chose to be so kind as to do so, but thank you. It made the book much better.
Well, good. No, I was glad to do it. I mean, my time is limited, and I'm sure sometimes emails get ignored. Every now and then I actually pay attention to an email, and yours seemed interesting, and so I got back to you. So I'm glad that my feedback was helpful. I think that I agree with you. In my experience, I've had so many wonderful LDS couples come through my clinic kind of with tragic stories about how their sex lives began, with a lot of misinformation, a lot of unrealistic expectations, a lot of just non-education about anatomy and how the bodies work. And so I think that sets up people for unfortunate kind of little tragedies that then can build into a lot more meaning. If you have a negative experience, you can make a lot of meaning around it that can be really negative, which then of course exacerbates the problem. So I think, when I read what you were wanting to try to do, anything along those lines, I think I want to support. And then I also feel strongly about trying to correct misinformation that might have even been, not through that you wanted to have misinformation, but some things that maybe could be even better, because I do feel really passionate about how good education and good information can really help people start on a much better footing. So it sounds to me like you wanted to offer the comprehensive sexual education that you got from reading kind of secular books on sexuality, but also respect the values that you come from in your own religious kind of framing, and that being, of course, Mormonism. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, just usually when I do these interviews, I ask people to tell a little bit about, how do you come to be a Mormon? Are you like pioneer heritage? Are you convert? Like, how does your Mormonism come into the picture here?
So my father's a member, but really wasn't a member, like a serious member, until I was about 7 or 8, and my mother, not a member. So I went from one church to the other, back and forth from evangelical or Christian or churches that were like a Baptist church and the like. Every other week, I'd go to a different church, back and forth until I was 18. I could make my own decision. So it's an interesting position, because I was able to make the choice, but also got training from the first, and was able to, and I don't know that I'm glad about everything about it, but I see the value that I got from having the experience on both, and having the ability to make a choice, but still get the training from an early age. So that's kind of what happened to me. And since then I've been, I'm married to a lifelong member, and kids later. Raise my kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay, good. Awesome. All right. So it sounds like positive experience then in regards to the church, and happy to have raised your kids in the church, and feeling you're active now. Is that correct?
I'm active now. And I would say the experience is largely positive, but human.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I like that. All right. So let's just dive right into some of what you wrote. I think it's done, I think, with some wit. I think you have some fun little quips that kind of, correlate to Mormonism. Like you start out with like the articles of faith, right? Of our family's sexual articles of faith. That's chapter 1.
Yes. And
so you have some similar kind of correlates there with LDS language.
It is similar correlates with LDS language. And I also wanted to be really clear, like, how do I make sure that this is not rating as something official? Where do I have some authority that I can say something and feel, okay, like I can say this and no one can really gainsay me. And the one place where it is really within the family, right? Like the parents are responsible. Handbook 2, parents are responsible for the sex education of their children. I mean, that's me. So I can do this. I can say these are our family's sexual articles of faith. We believe these things. And the framing, I think it took a while to get to it. This is something that a lot of it just kind of flowed naturally about hearing about a lot of things, but also if there's anything in the book that I prayed over and sought active inspiration, it's this.
The articles of faith.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because if these aren't, if I don't have a clear idea of what I believe about sex, then I'm on shaky ground. And part of it is I don't want to make comments that sound disloyal to others that might have gone past their own personal marriage and declare something that might be true or untrue. Might have been true for them. They might have felt that the Spirit said that, just pick some sexual act that, some people might feel to be inconsiderate, evil, disloyal. I don't know what, right? Something that would be destructive. And for others, like saying, well, what are you talking about? That seems totally normal to me. You could see how that would happen if people were wrong. That's one way. Or they're right and you're wrong. And the third way is it was wrong for them. And you can just take any act where you go, well, if I did it, it probably would be bad for me to do certain things. Like if I did it, I'd mean it, and it wouldn't be nice. And that would something like sadism or something like that. Like I probably wouldn't be good at playing sadism. That's just not me. So that might not be a good thing for me. Somebody else that's doing it just to, as sexual play. I mean, who am I to tell them? I mean, listen to the Spirit yourself. I think the Spirit would tell me no, but that's me. For me, in my circumstance, in my marriage, wouldn't be.
So it sounds like you're taking this idea of personal authority, like as you were thinking about just how you're going to have authority to write this book, you thought about it from a personal perspective, and also maybe as the patriarch of your family, and also making room for this kind of concept, which is maybe more of a principle, that what might be right for me, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for everybody, and everybody has a right to that authority.
I didn't think of it necessarily as patriarchal authority, but as parental. And parents are the ones that have. I don't think the man has any particular right to this. I don't think that it's a priesthood power to be right about how to frame sex. I see no evidence of that anywhere.
Yeah, good. No, and I appreciate that language change, because I do use the word patriarch and matriarch just kind of as leaders of the home. But yes, I understand that those come with a lot of baggage in our culture. Yeah. So for sure, that can feel like some type of authority that wouldn't be shared with a wife or a mother. So thank you for clarifying that. Do you want to talk a little bit about some, not that I expect you to read all of the sexual principles of faith, but do you want to talk about a few of them?
Sure. So I think the first one is a lot flows from it. And this is something I believe. And so in our family, we believe sexuality is a good gift from our heavenly parents. If you think of it as something that you're there to overcome, you think very differently about sex. If you think that it's a good thing and you have to find the right context for it, you can feel very positively about sex. So that a lot matters, and I think really centers around that. And I think that our religion has ample room for feeling that sex is a positive gift from our loving heavenly parents. When we have bodies that we believe are like unto theirs, presumably sexuality like unto theirs, we believe gender existed in pre-existence and premortal existence and is important now. We know from science that we're sexual basically from birth. We're sexual beings. It's part of us, and a good and godly part of us. I mean, it wasn't, and it was very good except for that one thing that I don't want to talk about. I'm sorry, I made a mistake there. It was very good. And I think that we hold that dear.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's lots of room for sex positivity in Mormonism that I often think gets ignored, unfortunately, due to fears or anxieties about certain aspects of behavior that we just, are uncomfortable with as an overall culture, such as premarital sex or something like that. So
Yeah.
good. Yeah. So anything else you want to mention as far as the guiding principles?
Well, you'd mentioned behaviors, and I think that's where a lot of us, and I certainly put myself in this camp, I don't exempt it, is to worry about, well, what behavior can I do and what behaviors can I not do? I think that's the framing that we often put things in. And honestly, the more listening to you and others like you that speak on these subjects and thinking about it and praying about it and really putting my mind to it, that idea of the behaviors as defining good or bad, I don't know. I think that's true. I think that the context in the behaviors makes something good or bad. My Sunday school yesterday, I said, okay, easy question class. We can all agree it's wrong to, if a person is incapacitated to kill them, stab them and take their clothes, right? They all nod their heads, falling neatly into my trap. Isn't that exactly what Nephi did to Laban? I mean, the guy's, inebriated on the ground. He killed him and took his clothes. And there are contexts that things that are totally wrong in some contexts are totally right in another. And so I think I sum that up probably best in a way of framing this that seems important to me. I don't have I don't have a doctrinal justification for this one, but it's something I do believe. I think it's really important. And that's the last one of these articles of faith. We believe sex that unites a married couple in Christ is good, and sex that divides a married couple is bad. That's a framing that I think that, other than a few proscriptions, gets us to a lot of what might be right or wrong. I mean, how does God view something like sex? I mean, what's the point of it? And the point is procreation, but certainly getting people together, like getting a marriage to be one flesh. I mean, that's an important part of the commandment right there. And if the sex that we do, any sexual act, divides the couple, then God's plan is frustrated. That can't be good. Sex that unites a couple, and especially that in Christ is a little bit hard as a sort of addendum on that, but unites a couple together to be doing good for each other, bringing them closer together, and then also closer to godliness. I mean, that's what makes sex good in my mind. And so I tell my family that's what makes sex good.
Right.
Yeah. So all of these things, I mean, they're not things that I can say, you must believe this way. I can't even say that to my adult kids now. I mean, I can just tell you this is what we believe, and give them the chance to say, well, do you believe the same? And gives them something to either to hang their hats on, and then to make judgment calls about, pick your sexual activity. Is it uniting a couple together? Is it dividing them apart? And that's a pretty good lens, I think. You may have more insight into whether or not that's actually a good lens, but in my mind, that makes it a lot easier to decide whether or not this is going to be something I'm going to feel okay doing, or something that, I really don't feel okay doing this. In fact, I think it's pretty destructive for us to do this. And I don't think God would be happy if we did destructive things, because it's separating us.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate a lot of your thoughts. One is this idea that you're already talking in a way where you recognize or realize that your children may disagree with you, right? And that you're making room for that this is our best, information for you. This is what we think worked for us. And this is what, a fairly good kind of comprehensive information around sexuality, but you also have the right to disagree with us, right? So I think that any parents that can kind of have that type of framing are already headed down a very well differentiated and kind of a more connective path with their children than having rigid, you have to agree with us, you have to see it the same way we do. I also appreciate your kind of process on context, so there are ethical implications, and you bring up kind of an example about violence, and violence is complicated. In general, I think most of us agree that violence is against our values, and yet there's self-defense, and there's soldiers and wartime, and there's all kinds of things that complicate that simplistic idea that all violence is bad because context, like you're saying, matters. And I do agree with, this idea that let's get away from behaviors. I think that I usually tease, I usually say, well, that's not masturbation's fault, or that's not missionary position's fault, right? Like, it's like not, I usually talk about it in that particular way. And what I mean by that is that, missionary position, for example, is kind of a position that most people are fairly comfortable. It's kind of probably one of the top positions we think about when you say the word sex. And yet it can be used in criminal ways, right?
Of course.
Can be used in very harmful ways. And it can be used in incredibly loving, soft, gentle ways, and it can be used in kind of raunchy, sex, fun, playful ways, right? And so that's what I mean by it's not missionary position's fault what we're doing with it. It's how are we using it to either, like you're saying, edify or detract from our relationship. I think where Mormons get a little bit in trouble is that they just assume that certain things that seem negative or seem objectifying or seem like it's uncomfortable territory in Mormon land then is just always going to detract from people's relationships, so
yeah,
like same-sex relationships, for example, there's a lot of ideas that, well, that's never going to be beneficial to a couple, even if they think it is, because it falls against our values. So that's a little bit where I think most, not just us, but most religious communities might project their own values onto other people instead of really having that open space of, something that I truly don't find that falls into my value system might actually edify other people's sexuality or relationship, even though it doesn't my own.
That's really true.
That's what I would add for it. That's what I would add.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to be clear too that, as I read this book, I didn't always agree with you, and that's okay. No. And I told you those things that I didn't agree with. But I didn't need to agree with you from a clinical perspective, because I also was, I guess, honoring your role as a parent, and that's how you were writing this book. And I still felt like I agreed with way more than I disagreed with, so like, I'd throw out there 95%, the book I agreed with. And even the things that maybe I didn't agree with are things that I struggle with in our culture anyway. So the fact is that having a book like this in the hands of most LDS people is still going to benefit them way more than it would detract, even from my perspective on the things that I disagreed with. So I just want to put that out there. That's how I feel very comfortable supporting this book, even though there were things I disagreed with.
And I changed 90 to 95% of the things that you disagreed with, because they were at times, they were like when you said, well, when if we're talking, we've been talking pretty high level, pretty nice stuff. We get into the details, we get into the details on this book. And as an example, there's one section on oral sex, of fellatio, where I'm talking about, it wouldn't be helpful to gag, nobody's going to want to gag their wife. So you shouldn't do that. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Yeah. No, some people actually do that as part of a sex play or a dominance play. Like, oh, well, yeah. Sorry, I didn't know that. I didn't read that in a book.
Right. That's one of those things where you want to be careful to, say on the one hand, don't assume your partner's going to like that and just expect it, because that can be really harmful, especially if you've seen it, in pornography or things like that. And on the other hand, don't assume your partner isn't going to like it or isn't going to develop a preference for it even into your relationship, right? Because we don't always like at first what we like 10 years from now or 20 years from now, as we kind of grow and things. So so that we had lots of fun conversation.
We did. That one was the one that really stuck in my mind. Like, wait, people want, okay. That whole feeling about being uncomfortable about it. This is one, and I'm not. I am not going to spend my time dishing on the church. But I do recognize that if we're trying to listen to the Spirit for things that are, this is good for us or not good for us, it would be awfully easy to mistake being uncomfortable because it's a new thing for us from being a withdrawal from the Spirit. So everything we do that's new feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good the first time. Like just new things in general. He's like, I thought playing the piano was going to be easier. and not so easy. Now I feel kind of disillusioned. I didn't like that. That's how we feel the first time we do something new, anything new. And that's one that kind of does worry me a bit now that I've kind of come to that realization that new acts, especially new acts that are sexual, those things make us feel uncomfortable just inherently. We feel awkward. We feel weirded out. But if that was the judge of whether or not that's the spirit, like I felt uncomfortable the first time, I felt a little weirded out. I don't think many people get past the honeymoon. So a lot of people feel uncomfortable and weirded out there.
Yeah, no, I talk about this concept all the time. So I'm glad that you're, offering a second or 500th witness of people who talk about these issues. And I think that that's absolutely right. I think that we oftentimes see discomfort, especially in sexuality. If we're uncomfortable playing the piano, we don't usually say, well, that's the dark side trying to get me to not play the piano. Right. We're just like, I hate the piano, right? But we don't make that extra meaning. But with sexuality, we oftentimes do more easily correlate, evil or Satan or those kinds of concepts with discomfort, because if I'm uncomfortable, what does that feeling mean? And that's what I mean by meaning ruts. So if we have the meaning that you just offered, which means, well, this is new. Probably the first time I kissed somebody or French kiss somebody was uncomfortable. So probably the first time I'm going to have sex or have oral sex or try a new sexual position or a different type of sexual play, that's probably also going to be uncomfortable. And that doesn't have to mean that then it's evil or that it will detract from our relationship. And so big part of what I coach couples on is how to manage what level of discomfort because you don't want to go the other route either and ignore your discomfort, right? No. And go ahead and do things that you're really not wanting to do or feel pressured to do. So you don't want to necessarily do that either. And yet, do we want to kind of, sit with some level of discomfort so that we can see if it's going to be something that we get accustomed to and start to enjoy, or if it's something that we decide, this isn't for me, which is fine too, because there's lots of other things. So yeah, it's okay if some things aren't for me.
Yeah, and sex is an interesting one there because it's so physical. It's a physical act, not just. We think about the mental act. I mean, that is almost, and maybe that's the person that read the World Book Encyclopedia on the first level, and so I think of it that intellectually a lot, but it's not. I think we also know from dancing or sports or any of these other things that are just physical that until you do it, you don't really know it. You can read a lot, but you don't know it. Reading can help. But sometimes you just got to get in the bicycle and then then you can make a wise decision. Then you have a chance to have some basis of experience for some things. I'm kind of hearing in my mind what I might have thought of this conversation, 10 years ago or something like this. I think, wow, these people are saying just do anything. And I think probably the brakes on something like that are, is this going to bring us closer together? Mm-hmm. Does this break one of the obvious, almost immutable strictures that we have been kind of left against? Don't bring another person into the bedroom. That would probably. It's hard to see how that anybody can justify that in given the proclamation of the family, for example. And it's just can't get around that, and other things that we do know that at least have been church leaders have said just don't do these things. There are some of those. They're small, and they've really told us without telling us at times that it's up to us to figure it out for a lot of things.
Yeah, and that's an interesting dilemma too, because people outside of our value system find that some of those things that it does help their relationship, right? So like there's non-monogamous couples that are not Mormon, their values are very different. But I think keeping it from the perspective of what you're talking about, which is within that LDS structure and LDS values, yes, there's going to be some things that are not really seen as negotiable or not seen as things that will enhance the relationship, because the values really matter, and that, especially if you have two people who have similar values, they want to stay within that construct, and that's perfectly fine. And going against their values will detract from their relationship, because then it will add maybe unnecessary, guilt or shame or those kinds of things. So values do matter. But I just want to just note that not everybody who, does things that maybe are against LDS values necessarily has a bad experience. And the way that maybe I would, correlate that for people to be able to open their minds, it's kind of like there are other people in other religions that see things differently than we do, and that think, like, for example, maybe in Islamic cultures to, dress in a certain way as a woman, they see us as we're detracting from value, right? And we wouldn't necessarily agree with that. And we don't have that framing, we don't have that meaning. And so we kind of navigate the world very differently. So their values matter, our values matter. So I just want to kind of, introduce that idea a little bit. But I think that what you're, and back to the comfort scale, and your exercise metaphor, which I really liked, my Zumba instructor says every time we start, come to the class 3 times. If you don't like it after that, then you're probably not going to like it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that idea of engage more than once. Try it, because you're probably not going to get it exactly the first time, and it's going to take you a minute to get used to it. But then if you really just don't like it, try another class. There's like 500 other classes at the YMCA, right? So, but don't think that just because you had a negative or uncomfortable first time experience, it's necessarily always going to be that way.
Right.
So I like that metaphor a lot.
Well, and if the whole idea is that we have to try some things to figure out whether or not it's good for us or bad for us, does this bring us closer together? Some things that you really do need to just experience to know. That's not saying that, okay, well, I did it 3 times, and so now I'm forced to kind of continue doing it forever because I slipped and I just did this horrible thing. I mean, we're here to try to figure out what's good and right. We're here to become good servants. It's not meet that we be instructed in all things. And heaven knows we have not been instructed in all things in this way. We do not have the Pharisees list on good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. Even if we wanted it, it's not out there. It's just not. I mean, some people offer it up, but it's not there.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're alluding to too is that this is an ongoing journey. So you may try something a few times. You may decide this isn't really for me. It's okay to go back to the drawing board and say, you know what, I thought I might like it. You were willing. You seemed interested. I was willing for a minute. This isn't going to work. It's also okay to revisit that. Like I said, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road, you may feel very differently about a certain aspect of your sexuality. So it's kind of this ongoing contracting, right, is what I call it.
Yeah.
Ongoing negotiations, ongoing journey. You mentioned sexuality starts from birth and goes till death. So we have lots of time, lots of journeying. What you enjoy or do in your 20s is going to be different than in your 60s. It just is. So that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. So it sounds like we're on the same page about that. Okay. So let's kind of go through some of what you covered in the book. So you talk a lot about anatomy. So that's important. You want to kind of just walk us through why you picked the chapters you did, or certain chapters you want to talk about?
Well, the female anatomy, even in the people that were surveyed, more than one woman said, I didn't know where my clitoris was. And if that's happening, then nothing is likely to happen that's going to work out. In addition, from the time that I, picked up the copy of Everything You Want to Know About Sex, But We're Afraid to Ask, that was written in whatever the 70s, right? And pulled that off the shelf. I mean, from there to now, a lot has changed. We have fMRI that can see where spots in the brain light up. We have PET and CAT scans that can really just see things that are exquisitely detailed. There have been people that have had sex inside of some of these scanning machines, so you can see it in real time. And they've made videos of this, and that's nothing that will be like a porn sort of thing, but those kind of blobby images from inside of an MRI machine, and you can see things that you didn't see before. And one of the things that's really come up as something that at least I never saw in any of those sex books from the 70s or early 80s in that time, and is now known, is something like the structure of the clitoris being much more than that little tiny nib or thumb-sized, depending on the woman, appendage. Like that that's just the start of it. And the size of the clitoris is about the same size as a penis, which is shocking if you didn't know that. And knowing that there's more to the internal structure and how that works, and knowing that that thing includes these things called the vestibular bulbs that reach around the kind of outer third of the vaginal opening, like knowing those things then makes you go, oh, well, now I can understand that when those things get engorged, now the entire clitoral structure is now all like one kind of piece working together. And so now things that felt good at one time didn't feel good at the beginning, now feel good because there's kind of this puffiness there that now allows sensations to be transmitted throughout the entire clitoral structure. I mean, like these things science has moved. And there are things that even if even somebody, fairly nerdy, like, and read these books, at one time to learn this stuff in the first place, like, oh, wow, things have really changed. And so like getting that forward, even if you knew stuff before, there are things that you now can learn that you never knew before. And if you didn't know it in the first place, then yeah, you got to know that you need a map. You need a map, or you're not getting where you want to go. If you catch my drift.
Yeah, no, and I think that this is so important. I would totally agree that, my complaint is oftentimes that sexual education, when we kind of have it in a formalized way, is usually in middle school and high school. It's very reproduction focused. It's not pleasure focused. A lot of people don't ever learn about their clitoris or these parts, especially of female anatomy, that tend to be more pleasure driven versus reproductive driven. Yeah, I was always surprised that I learned about, I'm still learning about female anatomy. It just feels like, goodness grief, why didn't I know more of this stuff, growing up, or even in college classes, even in my therapy classes, right? So I think your point that knowing our anatomy is important is very, very accurate, especially in understanding our body's responses, because otherwise we're left with a lot of potential for inappropriate meaning. If arousal doesn't happen, if certain, sex hurts, if people are left to think, well, is it that you don't love me? Is it that you don't find me attractive? Like things that have really nothing to do with what really is happening, which is maybe there hasn't been sufficient time for arousal, etc. So you did a really good job of covering a lot of the anatomical pieces, and also more than just anatomy. It's kind of like, I think you spend a lot of time talking about arousal and the types of either foreplay or sex play that kind of lead to effective arousal for both men and women. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So part of the framing and why I chose certain topics to highlight more than others was driven by the common problems that you and others highlight that Latter-day Saints tend to have. So these include women that don't know their own anatomy and don't find sex pleasurable, don't orgasm. So what do we have to do? What do they have to know that then allows them to find that? And that's driven by a couple things. One is a lack of knowledge of the anatomy, so need that, but also permission to feel sexual, and then permission to think about and to frame their own need for fantasies. Like that strikes me as being something that's difficult for some people to feel comfortable with. And if you frame the idea that I am thinking about sexual things as being impure thoughts, it's going to be a long time. It's not going to work very well. And also particularly to give some permission to someone to be able to frame something that might be, you know better than I, but might be more taboo than they'd want to do. But really important is if they haven't had a first orgasm, then the 95% success rate treatment is to have directed self-stimulation. So if that's the way to get something to bless a marriage, by golly, we got to make sure that when they're told this by a sex therapist or need to do it on their own, that they feel okay about doing that and don't feel like what they're doing is wrong, like automatically wrong. Give them the tools that they need to be able to do those things. So those are kind of like on the female side of it. On the male side of it, like knowing about how female arousal works and knowing that it takes 20 minutes plus of non-genital touch, 20 minutes or plus of genital touch, depending on the woman, but a while, right? It's going to take a long time. Like that's, if you don't know those things, wedding night is going to be disappointing. It's just, I don't see how it can be otherwise. It's going to be painful. They're not going to be ready for intercourse. And in fact, is the wedding night a really good time for intercourse? Maybe you need to start like having a conversation, thinking about that too. But those are some of the big ones that you really need to be able to frame. A couple other ones that Ramel McElprang pointed out to me also is that one of the things that he ends up treating for Latter-day Saint couples a lot is perceived premature ejaculation. Like that's a real problem for them, whereas especially younger people, ED, erectile dysfunction, not very common, obviously more common later in life. So, okay, well, what do we think about that? If you tell someone that, okay, here's the definition of it. First of all, the average man will orgasm within 5 minutes of starting intercourse. Okay, once you know that, then maybe your 4.5 minutes wasn't really all that bad. Like people can be freed up from that. So give them that piece of information that they can free themselves up. Let someone know that for truly to be a problem, it's got to happen persistently. Like it's got to happen like basically every time or most of the time. It's got to happen like within a minute, usually seconds, but within a minute. Clinically, even to be considered. Like once you know those things, you might go, you know what? Actually, I'm kind of normal. I don't have a problem. And just telling people they don't have a problem separates, I think, a lot of people that would otherwise be very concerned and have considered that they have problems. And the kind of anecdotes that I'm sure you've run into more than I've read about, but where somebody has it happen, they ejaculate quickly, and then they just leave the bed in a huff, and their wife is like, "What happened here?" Like. And then they start avoiding sex because they don't ever want it to happen again. I mean, that's just tragic, right?
Right.
So knowing that, okay, this is a problem, that's not a problem. Here's how you're likely to be treated. And by the way, it works through something like start-stop technique or squeeze technique. I mean, just knowing these things can empower people that otherwise would be too embarrassed to come and get help, or give them a way to, eventually they're going to do it in their own home anyway. So, give them a little bit of self-help with something like this. That's where I focused on things that I considered from, reading people's histories, listening to you and others like you say these are the problems people have, especially if they're Latter-day Saints. And then some of the framing also, like if your belief is that that your goodness is predicated on being unsoiled, unsexual, you're going to have problems. You're going to have some, you're going to enter the marriage and think, well, first of all, probably first sex not all that good because, first sex. But then you're going to think, I gave up my virtue, my virtuous self for this. That's all there is. I mean, that isn't how, I don't want that for my daughters. I don't want that even for 1 second for my daughters. That's just horrible. And what do you have to do to be able to get people past not just the human problems that we have with being sexual, but the human problems that we as Latter-day Saints give ourselves, sometimes for very good reasons, but they're there. So let's acknowledge them and fix them. And that's part of why I focused on certain topics over others. Something like fantasies also. I mean, the word fantasy probably, I'm guessing you would know better than I, that triggers a lot of people to think, I don't think I want to do that. That maybe not. So I try to avoid that word. I call them sexual scenes, right? But knowing what scenes people have, and they tend to have, then also and the reason behind them can help women then feel better about what they have to do, what their body needs, what their mind needs to be fed, what their sexuality needs to be fed to be able to achieve an orgasm. So something like, if I have to have a scene that involves being in a park and people might come upon me, like one of the most common sexual fantasies that exists is being in a semi-public space. Mm-hmm. And with the idea there that, I mean, nobody knows why, but maybe why is that gets us our heart rate up. That gets us to be a little bit anxious in something like that. And where does our heart race and where does our blood pressure go up? Well, during sex. So it gives us a little bit of kind of the physical thrill that then pulls our body into sexual and to being sexual. It feels sexual, so we are sexual, which is also a good reason to exercise with someone. If you want to maintain a sexual connection, it's a good dating technique. I've now learned too late in life. So there's that. And then there's also, what if you have a very disturbing preferred sexual scene, right? Something that involves, like compelled sex, or something where you're like, wow, I would never want to do that in real life. And you could feel pretty gross about that. You could feel wrong about that. But what if you needed that to be able to orgasm, at least currently, right? So what do you do with that? Well, first, like, what's the meaning? Like, why would somebody have such a scene? And it might be, at least consider that maybe it gives you permission to be sexual. Like, you're being forced to be sexual and you secretly enjoy it. Well, great. Now you know why you needed that. And that might sap some of the kind of the darkness from it. And then you get a chance to be able to shift things to something else. So those are the places where I tried to focus, the places where it's not just what everybody has trouble with, though those were very important, but what we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints might have more problems with. And as I read histories, do have more problems with.
I love everything that you just said. I think all of those are very common themes, starting out with appropriate arousal for women, expectations about, a lot of times all that people hear is that you're going to have this wonderful sexual experience. You got married. As long as you get married in the right place, the right time with the right person, it will all work out, right? It'll just be amazing and beautiful and sacred. And we use all these kind of abstract words that build up a lot of expectation. And yet there's bodies involved, and there's brains involved, and there's hormones involved. And all of the stuff that you're bringing up can interfere with the expectations of what that first time is going to look like. So just even like you said, just understanding the time frames, to be diagnosed with premature ejaculation, for example, you need to, like you said, consistently be unable to last longer than a minute in intercourse type sex. And of course, there's lots of other types of sex, right? You don't have to have intercourse to still have a wonderful sexual time together. So so there's lots of these things that I think are just, you're really speaking to a lot of the anxieties that tend to come up for people who are largely uneducated about their sexuality. Even the idea of like self-stimulation or partner stimulation, it's interesting how that all gets very tied to masturbation, which, for a lot of people in LDS culture, that seems like a sin. So they forget that now they're contracting, now they're negotiating, now they're deciding whose hand and when is going to be on the body. And that's very much under the purview of, even what's in the bishop's handbook, which is that a couple's sexuality is really up to them to decide what is going to be comfortable or not. So, if everything's on the up and up and there's no secrecy, those are things that can definitely be contracted and talked about and negotiated, and nobody needs to feel badly about those. Because again, I think to your point, the principle is pleasure, joy, edification. Those are the goals, right? Not whether or not we touched a certain body part. It's like, that's just the means to the goals, right? And so I think sometimes we get too caught up in, like you said, those little nitpicky details. And you also are quite forward about oral sex. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because we have a little bit of a history in, Mormonism, where at one point, again, I think because of cultural overlay, where many people, and including leaders in our church, talked about oral sex being unnatural or unholy, whereas that's really not the position that we have today.
And I'm so glad that that's the position that we no longer have. I mean, that, and I don't know what went through people's heads, honestly. Maybe it was one of those where it would have been wrong for them and they assumed it would be wrong for everyone. I don't know. But thank goodness that I don't have to figure that one out. That's one where I knew from having read that there would be a significant percentage of women that would not have an orgasm ever if they didn't have that. So that just seemed nonsensical from the beginning. I only heard it, of course, after the fact. I wasn't old enough to have been given such an instruction, so aging myself a little bit, but thank goodness, because I do know that was one of the ones I heard at Deseret Tower. Somebody telling me that I'm like, what are you talking about? That's just nuts. Like, that doesn't make any sense at all to me. And knowing how important oral sex was to so many women, and that's one where, okay, I'm definitely going to try this in my marriage and see if it's right or not. And yeah, I think that's just nonsense. So I'm very skeptical of that one being. I don't think it's true of my marriage. I don't think it's just true. So if it's and that's where I have authority, so I'm going to sit on it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's a common theme throughout, is finding that authority as a couple to decide what's going to be best for you, and what's going to be beneficial to reliability of orgasm, reliability of pleasure, libido management, right? So some people have, closer libidos than others. And so how they manage those things can incorporate different types of behaviors, and why certain things can be harmful for one couple that are actually very beneficial to another couple. So I couldn't agree more. How involved was your wife in writing this book or in this process with you?
So she edited it and did a very good job editing. So she's a very good copy editor, and did so. She did so, I think, I don't want to say under duress, but it was definitely a Christmas present. It's just not her thing. It's really not her thing to talk about this stuff. I don't want to psychoanalyze why that's necessarily true for her. It's a little surprising to me, but on the other hand, she's also the person that puts out, the wrong birthday online so that nobody can ever figure out, be able to track her down or something like that, or doesn't give her middle name because they didn't ask for the middle name on her passport, so it's not on it, that kind of stuff. So it's maybe just part of a general sense of being kind of closer,
more private,
more private about some of these things.
Yeah.
You never guess it if you talk to her, but but it is true. So she has certain things and that's one of them. So I'm glad. I'm so thankful that this could have been really a wedge between us, and she stepped up and did something that was quite uncomfortable for her, because the alternative is that she thinks that I'm just kind of pervy and and like to talk about this stuff. Why would you ever do such a thing? It's just terrible. That's how she could have viewed it, and she I think she stepped up.
Well, that's awesome. What about your kids? Have your kids been able to read it? It was for them.
It is. So, my wife would be happy if they got it 6 hours before their marriage, and that's about the right time frame in her where nothing bad can happen. So she's under the belief that having this is just would excite them too much and would cause them to become more sexual than they would be otherwise. I happen to know that the evidence is against her on that. Even in very religious communities, comprehensive, detailed sex education, like in Jewish communities, has been shown to lead people to delay sex more. So thankfully, before she told me that 6-hour rule, I'd already disseminated it to many of our kids. So okay. I'm not going to stick it in her face, and say haha, and I told them look, mom's giving me this kind of she feels it would be damaging to you. So maybe let's just be quiet about it. But I do want one of my daughters, I just want her, because she's dating now, I want her not to, I don't want her to be so curious that she becomes sexual because she's curious. I don't want her to go on Wikipedia and figure this stuff out there, because A, there's nonsense. Wikipedia is pretty good, but B, it's Wikipedia has kind of even gotten away from illustrations. It's just it's pictures, not something that I feel comfortable with. So I want Google Dad. I want them to come to me with crazy questions, and allow me to do that. And certain ones of my kids, I think, need this. certain ones of my kids I don't think need this, but I feel like we're probably in a good spot right now with which ones have gotten the information, which ones haven't gotten the information. Certainly, as they get closer to marriage, I'm gonna make sure they get a copy.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I would second your thoughts that comprehensive sexual education does tend to empower, individuals and help them make decisions that are aligned with their values versus, either not being prepared or impulsive kinds of decisions. Of course, personalities, and there's all kinds of factors that go into choices that especially teenagers or young adults make. And I would also just kind of, probably say that what we know about it is that intercourse is delayed, not necessarily all sexuality. And so that's another whole topic, right? Is at what point does it become sex, right? And so
Sure.
Kids and teenagers are dating and they're touching and they're kissing and they're fondling maybe or caressing each other. Where does that become information that might be helpful to them about arousal, which is going to happen whether they're having intercourse or not.
Right.
How to understand their bodies, how to understand how to, manage their bodies in ways that align with their values and that aren't necessary, and that hopefully they have permission from parents like you to really consider their values, not just be told what their values are, right? Because that doesn't usually work either. So, yeah. I'm going to be much more aligned with my values if I can own them, if I can feel like aligned with them, if I can feel like I've had time to think and, they resonate with me versus just, oh, this is how it is.
Yeah. And I also want to give my kids some feeling that what sexuality they feel and what sexuality and arousal that they feel, that there's some use to that it's not just something that's wrong, but it's right. Maybe not now, but also right now in certain ways, right? I want them to be able to, crack the lid of the box open enough to know that I'm attracted to this person. Like that's important. You ignore that one and things are not going to work out well. Like there's a value to some of these things that are there. If you don't lay down certain ideas about what feels, sexual or sexy or nice to me, then you've got more work to do once you're married too. So there are clear advantages to having taken some mastery over it before you're expressing your sexuality in marriage also. So it's hard because the simple answer is not always the right answer. And the simple answer is just like, don't think about any of this stuff. And there's some real problems, right? I mean, if the answer is, I am going never to masturbate as a guy, say, I'm never going to look at any other woman. If you succeed at those two things, by the way, then you're going to be pretty stunted. Like completely, like none of that. Like I have no arousal from anything. You're going to have destroyed your ability to have normal sexual relations, I would think. But the other thing that it does is that it puts you in a position where you start linking pornography to masturbation and self-stimulation. You link those things together, well, guess what's going to happen? I mean, you're going to say, I'm going to do none of these things, and then you're finally kind of like driven it. Then you look at porn and you get in this cycle of just like looking at porn. That's the only time you masturbate, and then you're back in the cycle again. And now those two things are linked, and now you have to kind of have those things together. I don't want that either, So it's like you have to recognize the downsides of certain kinds of defense. There are defenses that if you decide that looking at pornography is just sinful on the face of it, then if that's what you decide, then let's think about the ways that you could most prevent yourself from doing that. And that might not be saying, I am never going to look at another woman. Like that might not help you. Like making that kind of a fetish out of like, I'm going to like, this thing is so forbidden that I can't even think about this stuff. Well, you're going to think about it because your sexuality is coming out no matter what you do. Like, it's gonna come. It's there. It's you. So you have to think about how you use it, not just repressing it. Repressing it will just push it. It'll come out, and you'll be unhappy with the result, probably.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that idea of things that we suppress or try to deny oftentimes, and especially even meanings that we give to it, right? Like it has to be this or it has to be that, can actually enhance a problem or make that problem feel like it has more power or like it's more out of control than what it actually is.
Right.
So I agree with that. All right. Well, I know that we're kind of at the end of our time. Why don't you talk a little bit about just, you mentioned that this is free as far as a PDF format. You also have it, I think, available on Amazon. So why don't you just give us information on how to access the book?
So I'm going to give the email address twice, and then right now and then at the end. So the email address, if you want a free PDF of this, and it says right at the beginning, it is legal. You have my express permission to share this with anybody you want. Just don't make money off of it. Just share it. I want this to be read. I want this to be used. And the email is earthlyparents@gmail.com. So if you want a PDF, send it to me, and when I see it in the day, I'll just send it over to you and share away. You find it of value, give it to someone that you think might need it. Someone who is like about to be engaged, and you think, they may not really be getting this kind of, like, I don't know if they really know what they're doing. Send it to them. I mean, it's a little embarrassing, maybe, but get over it. I mean, it's got to be better than the tears and pain and kind of horror that a lot of people really do have. So that's what I tell myself, as embarrassed as I am to sometimes, to send it to some people who know who I am. So that's one way to get it, and free is a good price, and they can save their money to pay for your podcast. And, that's fine. But if you want, just because you like to have it, a physical copy, just go onto Amazon and type in, and it was very good, and you should be able to find it. You may have to click down a little bit. If you type it's very good, and then separately Earthly Parents, I feel pretty confident you'll find it. And then you can get a hard copy of it, and it's even revised from the one that you have there. I don't think that you could tell from the outside what exactly it is. So if it's something that would be embarrassing to someone to carry around openly, it's not going to be something that you really know exactly what it is based on the cover. Cover is painted by Dana Mario Wood, who, if you go into this year's manual of the home manual, on number 3, the one with the 3 wise men, Dana painted that also. So very happy that Dana was kind enough to have painted this for the cover of the book. And you can also get it. You can also get it as as a Kindle e-version. And so I'll give the email address for the free version one more time: earthlyparents@gmail.com, and I'll send it to you.
Great. And I just linked to both the Amazon and your email on the Mormon Sex Info page here on Facebook Live. So people can have those already available to them.
And I just want to thank you one more time. You were so kind and so generous with your time to be able to tell me what things would be problematic for people I don't know, people that you don't know. They're just going to show up and they're going to read the book, and you help avert probably some disaster. So I really thank you, and just thank you for the work you do.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm so glad that you felt comfortable to reach out to me and that we were able to connect. I really enjoyed helping you edit it, and it was kind of funny. We went through it together on live. I just said, I'd rather just talk to you versus write you a bunch of stuff. So you were very patient with me as I read your book and gave you feedback all along the way. So that was very, I actually enjoyed it. So thank you for thinking of me.
Thank you.
Do you have any last minute thoughts or things maybe I didn't cover that you were hoping to say that I didn't maybe ask you about?
I think that probably the other thing that's kind of in here is that it really gives you permission to feel good about what you're doing. Like that there are things that even if you've been married for 25 or 35 or 45 years, there will be things in here you probably don't know because science has moved on. There are things in here to learn. But especially if you are engaged to be married or newly married, I just encourage you, just get the free version of this then, and take the chance to add some knowledge from people that actually have like studied this and are experts at this, and give you the permission you need to get the good sex that you need and your marriage needs. It's there, and it is very good.
I love that. I love how normalizing it is of so many things, like you said, that I think people just automatically either feel like they're weird or alone, or somehow we must be the only ones experiencing something like this. Or it was a very normalizing, well-informed read. So I really appreciate your work. I hope that your kids benefit from it. I'm sure they will. I love when parents are willing to really be open and frank with their kids about sexuality. It's such a great, if there's anything you can offer your kids, that's a great gift. That's a great gift. Even if it's embarrassing, even if they say, oh my gosh, the last thing I want is my dad talking to me about sex, it's actually very, very helpful for them to know that you're comfortable, that you're willing, and that you're informed. So congratulations to you. I hope you have a lot of success with this. I hope people will be willing to download the free version or buy a version. And I wish you the best, EP, with future endeavors.
Thank you.
All right.
You too.
Take care. Good night.
Night.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles. And as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
It's been a long road here, a trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. extraordinary. It's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary.
Ordinary.
No, it's extraordinary.